This is Federalist 56, Part 1. Remember, in the last Federalist, Madison said that there are 4 categories of criticisms about the number of representatives that the Constitution says the Congress can start off with. That's 65 members for the first Congress of the United States. So in Federalist 55, he defended against the first criticism. Here he's going to defend against the second criticism, which anti-federalists are saying 65 people are not going to be knowledgeable enough about this whole country to tend to the affairs of this country. And Madison says, no, you're wrong, because there are only certain things that these 65 people have got to be really well versed in or become good at. The rest of it we're going to leave to the states to do. He actually takes care of 2 things here. Not only he answers them in this sense, that 65 members will be plenty, but he also wants to say and kind of make them feel good about the fact that the federal government is only going to be responsible for certain things. State governments will retain a whole bunch of power. And that's, to begin with, that's what these anti-federalists wanted. So these 3 areas that he says these representatives are going to become more knowledgeable, become almost expert at, he gives it in this very short paragraph. And let me read that short paragraph to you. What are to be the objects of federal legislation? Those which are of most importance and which seem most to require local knowledge are commerce, taxation, and militia. So commerce, taxation, and militia is where these members of the House of Representatives, especially the first 65, are going to be really knowledgeable about and become actually even more knowledgeable as they go along. So let me start at the very beginning of Federalist 56. The second charge against the House of Representatives is that it will be too small to possess a due knowledge of the interests of its constituents. So constituents elect representatives, and representatives work or represent constituents' interests. So that's what a constituent is. Okay, the second paragraph. As this objection evidently proceeds from a comparison of the proposed number of representatives with the great extent of the United States, the number of their inhabitants, and the diversity of their interests, without taking into view at the same time that the circumstances which will distinguish the Congress from other legislative bodies, the best answer that can be given to it will be a brief explanation of these peculiarities. So here he's going to talk about these peculiarities, these differences. It is a sound and important principle that the representative ought to be acquainted with the interests and circumstances of his constituents. But this principle can extend no further than to those circumstances and interests to which the authority and care of the representative relate, and ignorance of a variety of minute and particular objects which do not lie within the compass of legislation is consistent with every attribute necessary to due performance of the legislative trust. In determining the extent of information required in the exercise of a particular authority, recourse then must be had to the objects within the purview of that authority. So here he's directly and indirectly saying that the federal government is going to be only responsible for certain things. And without mentioning it, he's saying most of the things will be left to the states. All we want is for these 65 representatives that go to the first Congress, if you ratify this Constitution, will take care of what you have asked them to do, what the authority you've given to them. But majority of the work is left for the states. It's only what he says again in the short paragraph that these 65 members will have to deal with. What are to be the objects of the federal legislation? Those which are of most importance and which seem most to require local knowledge are commerce, taxation, and the militia. A proper regulation of commerce requires much information, as has been elsewhere remarked. But as far as this information relates to the laws and local situation of each individual state, a very few representatives would be very sufficient vehicles of it to the federal councils. So again, what you need is only a limited number of people that will acquire this information, take care of the job, and that's why we decided to go with 65. Because you, anti-federalists, and the people you represent in all these states that want to keep as much sovereignty as possible to your states are getting your wish. The federal government is only going to be involved in a few things. The next paragraph is pretty long, so I'll start. Taxation will consist in a great measure of duties which will be involved in the regulation of commerce. So far, the preceding remark is applicable to this subject. As far as it may consist of internal collections, a more diffusive knowledge of the circumstances of the state may be necessary. But will not this also be possessed in sufficient degree by a very few intelligent men, diffusively elected within the state, divide the largest state into 10 or 12 districts, and it will be found that there will be no peculiar local interests in either which will not be within the knowledge of the representative of the district. Besides this source of information, the laws of the state, framed by representatives from every part of it, will be almost of themselves a sufficient guide. In every state there have been made and must continue to be made regulations on this subject, which will in many cases leave little more to be done by the federal legislature than to review the different laws and reduce them in one general act. A skillful individual in his closet with all the local codes before him might compile a law on some subject of taxation for the whole Union without any aid from oral information, and it may be expected that whenever internal taxes may be necessary, and particularly in cases requiring uniformity throughout the states, the more simple objects will be preferred. Okay, here notice he's not even mentioning Federalist number 10 or what he said in Federalist number 10, where he said we will make the districts larger, and out of these large districts, different factions fighting amongst one another. Usually the most knowledgeable person will become eventually the candidate. So without saying anything about Federalist 10, he says, since we are enlarging the sphere of the Republic, more able, more knowledgeable candidates will come to be elected. And these knowledgeable, these intelligent, these virtuous, hopefully virtuous candidates will look at all the laws that have been compiled in different states and use them, become knowledgeable of those. When he says closet, see, sometimes he says that in a derogatory way when he says these people who only sit in their closets and read. He's talking about people that sit at home and read and are not familiar with anything else. But here he's saying that when the laws are put together in different states, even a person, any average person that can sit at home and look at them and come up with a general idea of what they say. Now, when these laws are available to somebody intelligent that you're going to send to the House of Representatives, then this person can do lot more good with it than an average person. That's why you don't need hundreds of people to represent these 13 new states. We want the wisest people in different districts in different states to run for office, and if you elect them, they will be intelligent enough to use all the material that have been gathered in states, all the knowledge, all the laws of the states, and come up with uniform laws that will be good for the country, uniform laws that will be has to do with taxation and commerce. Two of the three things that he mentions here that the federal representatives will have to deal with.